Hey friend, Graham here from recordingrevolution.com, and we got to talk about the question that's in my head every day of my life. Is rock music dead? Now, you may not care about rock music. That's fine. I do. I really like rock music. It's what I grew up on. But it's at least important to be aware of it as a genre because things have changed. And so it makes me wonder, is this over? I mean, does anybody even listen to rock music anymore? Does anybody even care about guitars and drums and real instruments? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to call you out if you push a button and music comes out, but oh man, I have thoughts. All right, so I'm going to give you the short answer. I don't think rock music is dead. I think it has just gone through a lot of evolutions, and history would tell us this. We're not going to go as far back as when rock and roll actually was invented. We're going to go only as far back as when I was born, which was in the 1980s. Yeah, 1983. And in the 80s, you had in your face anthem rock and roll. You had a lot of genres, a lot of type of music, but let's just talk about rock and roll. 80s in your face music. I'm thinking Aerosmith. I'm thinking Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, just that anthem rock sound. And then, of course, you had glam rock and hair bands, and it got kind of weird. I'm not saying I want to bring all of that back. I'm just saying this had a sound to it. And then it evolved into the 1990s, and you looked at the early 90s grunge rock movement, especially a lot of the bands coming out of Seattle, Washington at the time, which were playing in the late 80s, but that bled into the early 90s when finally mainstream radio caught on to them. It was almost a pushback to the kind of rock and roll that was big and popular in the 80s. And so you had bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Nirvana, where this big, flashy, extroverted rock and roll took a back seat to the more introverted, sort of pensive, almost subtle and subdued rock and roll. It was like, hey, we're just normal guys. We have our flannel shirts. We have some weird, gritty pedals. It's not polished. It's not as big and exciting. It's just angst and raw energy and real emotion. And the youth of the early 90s, and I would fall into that camp, really identified with this music movement. This kind of rock and roll appealed to us because it didn't seem produced, it didn't seem commercial. It seemed like, you know what, screw you, radio. We don't want to be on the radio. Ironically, that's how they got on the radio because it was so popular. But then the 90s were an amazing time for hip hop. You know, you got Dr. Dre, you got Tupac. I mean, hip hop blew up in the 1990s and became super mainstream. And so many of the rock bands just got awful in the late 90s. No offense if you were one of them. I just found it really hard to find really good rock music in the late 90s. We had a brief dance with nu metal in the early 2000s when Linkin Park was kind of championing that sound and many other bands, but they actually kind of came through that for a while when so many of the other bands disappeared, but it was really aggressive. It was also a product of the digital production of those days when you had so many bad sounding limiters and the loudness wars, and just all this stuff created this sound. So it was interesting that both genre wise, rock took a weird turn, and then production wise, the way we made records affected that sound and the way we hear a whole generation of music, which unfortunately got destroyed. But at the same time, in the early 2000s, you had big indie rock bands blowing up. So rock started to diverge. And then in the 2010s, the decade we just finished, I feel like hip hop reigned supreme yet again. And I've been looking around, and there's just not nearly as many rock bands or people playing rock music as there used to be. But in the last 2 years or so, I feel like we're seeing a lot more classic rock, like traditional rock and roll, come to the surface. Bands like Greta Van Fleet with a very Led Zeppelin infused sound is coming to the forefront. And even rock bands that were huge in the past, everyone from the Rolling Stones to Foo Fighters to the Killers, are still able to sell out stadiums and make a lot of money touring. So the appeal is still there. So back to the main question for today's video. Is rock music dead? Probably not. It's just continuing to evolve. There are still people who still dig live music with real drums and real guitars. There's something powerful about seeing that played and experiencing great musicianship that is still appealing. But one thing that has changed and it's continuing to affect the kind of music you hear is the way we listen to music and the way we consume music with streaming playlists on Spotify and Apple Music. People, and especially the younger generations these days, the way we consume music is just one song after the other and automated recommended songs without having to go buy music or pick bands, just hear what's being played. And so you're having a bunch of cross genre songs in the same playlist. Kids today will go from listening to a Drake song and immediately they'll be followed by an Arctic Monkeys song, and then it will immediately be followed by a Hans Zimmer orchestral piece. It's all over the map, which is kind of cool. We've become more diverse in the type of music we like to listen to. I think we become a culture that doesn't just like a genre, and that's what I identify with. We like music as a whole, and we want to consume more and more of it. That's why when people say the music industry is dead, they don't know what they're talking about. The music industry is alive and well. Just the way we monetize music is changing, but the demand for music is higher than ever because the access to music is higher than ever. When you give people what they want more of it. So people want to consume music, and because they can stream music either for free or for a low cost every month, they're more willing to listen to a lot of types of music. They don't have to be in their car listening to the radio. They can stream it on any device, anywhere they go, and they're willing to try out different genres. In a weird way, that's actually going to help rock music come back to the forefront and appeal to a wider audience than maybe it once did. Good examples of this are bands like Kaleo and the Black Keys, who really have created mass market appeal in a lot of ways because they've gotten their tracks in sync deals, licensed on TV commercials and movies. So if you are a rock music lover, as I am, have no fear. Rock music isn't dead for two reasons. One, as long as you make it, it's alive and well. And two, as we consume more and more music and people are exposed to more and more music and become more music lovers and not genre lovers, I think rock can evolve and appeal to a wider net of people. If you are a rock artist, I would encourage you to evolve your sound. You may not like the band, but I'm a huge fan of Rush. And Rush is a great example of a rock band that has evolved. They sounded like the 70s rock bands in the 70s. They sounded like the 80s rock bands in the 80s. They sounded like the 90s rock bands in the 90s, and so on, because they were willing to evolve with the sounds and the instruments of the time. When it was just guitar, bass, and drums, that's what they were. When synths and keyboards got huge in the 80s, they added those. When it got dry and less reverby and less gunshot snare in the 90s, they went back to dry, less reverby, and less gunshot snare in the 90s. They are great songwriters and performers, and they were willing to evolve as a band. And I think you should too if you're in rock music. And hey, if you don't like rock music, why are you watching this video? Just joking. Love you a ton. But if you don't like rock music, that's totally fine. But I would encourage you to listen to some rock music to get inspiration for whatever genre you do. I love learning from other genres. Just like in business, I love learning from different industries that have nothing to do with me. Cross-pollinating ideas is how we evolve as a species, and there's some good that can come from exposing your mind to some more interesting sounds that you haven't heard before or that you don't normally listen to. That's it for today's video. Let me know in a comment below, do you think rock music is dead? Is this evolution idea just not really the case and you think it is dead, 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 and no one cares about rock music? Let me know. Or if you agree with me, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for being a part of the Recording Revolution. And if you're watching this video around the time it was posted, Merry early Christmas and Happy New Year. I hope you're having a wonderful time with some family and friends. And I hope you have some time to settle down and reflect on how this year has gone for you and your music. Got some amazing stuff coming in January. Cannot wait to share it with you. Details coming on the channel, so stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel because if you want to make music in 2020, you're going to love what I'm dropping in January. Until then, my friend, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.